The first thing I saw when I pulled into my driveway was a cloud of dust drifting across my lawn. The second thing I saw was a backhoe tearing straight through the flower beds my late wife planted 10 years ago. And standing there, sipping an iced coffee like he was watching a golf tournament instead of destroying somebody else and Oppo's property, was my neighbor, Ethan Calloway. Now look, I'm not the kind of guy who starts trouble with neighbors. I'm 56 years old, I teach history at a community college outside Asheville, North Carolina, and honestly, I like a quiet life. I mow my lawn on Thursdays, I drink cheap beer on the porch on Fridays, and I've lived in that same cedar-sided house for almost 20 years. But Ethan was the exact opposite. He moved into the neighborhood about a year earlier after buying the old Whitmore property at the end of the cul-de-sac, and from the second the moving truck showed up, everybody knew he was going to be that guy. You know the type. Loud without realizing he's loud. Friendly in a way that somehow still feels like bragging. Every conversation turned into a story about venture capital, crypto, private schools, or some luxury resort in Cabo. He drove this matte black Range Rover that looked like it had never touched dirt in its life, wore those tiny expensive sneakers rich guys always wear now, and somehow managed to make carrying groceries look arrogant. At first, people in the neighborhood tried to like him. My next-door neighbor Diane baked him banana bread. Old Mr. Hargrove offered him the number for a local handyman. Ethan barely looked up from his phone during conversations, and after a while, folks stopped trying. Then came the renovations. Dear God, the renovations. For almost 10 straight months, there was always something happening over there. First a pool, then a stone fire pit, then an outdoor kitchen with one of those stainless steel pizza ovens that probably cost more than my first car. Every weekend, there'd be another delivery truck blocking half the street, while Ethan stood outside with his architect talking about expanding the entertainment footprint. I remember saying to Diane one afternoon, at this point he's one infinity pool away from turning the place into a boutique hotel. She laughed, but honestly, it bothered people. Not because he had money, but because he acted like the whole neighborhood was just scenery around his life. Still, none of that was my business until the afternoon I came home and found his contractors standing in my yard. One guy was spray painting orange lines across the side of my property, while another had already dug out nearly 15 feet of dirt along the fence line. My fence line. I got out of the truck and just stood there for a second trying to process what I was looking at because the scene felt so insane my brain almost rejected it. Then I noticed my hydrangeas flattened into the mud like they'd never existed. I walked straight over and asked one of the workers what the hell was going on. The guy looked uncomfortable immediately, pointed toward Ethan, and muttered, "You should probably talk to the homeowner." Homeowner. That word hit me like a slap. Ethan spotted me walking over and gave me this casual little smile, like we were about to discuss barbecue recipes instead of property theft. "Hey, Martin," he said, not even taking his sunglasses off. "Little construction day over here." I looked past him at the framing stakes hammered deep into the ground, deep into my ground. "Your guys are on my property." He actually chuckled. Not according to the updated survey. Then he pulled a folded document out from under his arm and tapped it with 2 fingers like he was presenting evidence in court. Turns out the original property lines were off by a few feet. Happens all the time. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Ethan, that land's been part of my yard since before you were old enough to shave." He shrugged. "Well, now it isn't." And then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Besides, you weren't really doing anything with it anyway." I swear to God, something in me shifted when he said that. It wasn't even about the land anymore. It was the way he said it. Like because I wasn't rich enough to build a luxury patio there, the space somehow mattered less. Like ordinary people only deserve what they actively monetize. I looked over at the crushed flowers, the broken bird bath my wife picked out years ago, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt genuinely angry. Not irritated. Not frustrated. Angry in a way that settles deep in your chest and just sits there, waiting. And standing there in his expensive sunglasses with construction equipment rumbling behind him, Ethan gave me one last smug smile and said, "Don't worry, Martin. Once the patio's finished, it'll look a lot better than those bushes ever did." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing dirt flying through the air and those hydrangeas disappearing under tractor wheels. Maybe that sounds dramatic to some people, but when you've lived somewhere long enough, your home stops being just property. It becomes memory. My wife, Ellen, planted those flowers the summer before she got sick. We used to sit out there in folding chairs drinking sweet tea while cicadas screamed from the trees. So hearing Ethan dismiss it all like some useless patch of dirt, yeah, that stayed with me. Around 2 in the morning I got out of bed, walked downstairs, and pulled the old lockbox from the hall closet where I kept all the paperwork for the house. Deeds, tax records, insurance documents, survey maps, everything. I spread it all across the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started digging through page after page while rain tapped against the windows. And the more I looked, the less sense Ethan's story made. According to every document I had, the property line hadn't changed in over 30 years. There were old county maps, utility sketches, even handwritten notes from the previous owner. Everything matched. The next morning I drove straight to the county clerk's office carrying a folder so thick it looked like I was preparing for trial. The woman behind the counter, Carla, recognized me immediately because small towns are like that. She glanced through my paperwork, frowned, then pulled up Ethan's revised survey on her computer. Well, she muttered, chewing gum while scrolling. His documents were filed last month. Filed by who? I asked. Survey company out of Charlotte. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. Looks official. I leaned closer and immediately noticed something weird. The updated line wasn't straight. It curved inward near the side yard in this strange little arc that magically gave Ethan exactly enough room for the oversized patio he was building. It looked less like a legitimate correction and more like somebody trying to squeeze furniture into a room that didn't fit. Carla gave me an apologetic look. You can dispute it, Martin, but these things take time. Time. That was the problem. Every hour that passed meant more concrete getting poured into my yard. When I got home later that afternoon, the patio foundation had doubled in size. Workers were carrying stone slabs through what used to be my garden while music blasted from a portable speaker. Ethan spotted me from across the yard and actually waved. Looking good, right? He shouted over the noise. I ignored him and walked inside before I said something that'd land me in jail. That evening Diane came over with a casserole because apparently my misery had become visible from the street. She sat at my kitchen table while I vented for almost an hour. At one point she quietly said, "You know, my husband used to say people like Ethan only understand consequences." That line stuck with me. Consequences. Around 9 o'clock, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. My uncle Walter. Walter sold me this house after retiring from the city planning department back in the 90s, and the man never threw away a single document in his life. Blueprints, permits, zoning maps. He kept boxes of old records stacked in the attic like historical artifacts. Most of it was probably useless, but honestly, I was desperate enough to look. So I climbed up into the attic with a flashlight and started opening dusty cardboard boxes while insulation drifted through the air like snow. For nearly an hour, I found nothing but old tax receipts and faded neighborhood plans. Then I opened a long flat tube tucked behind an air vent. Inside was a full original infrastructure map for the entire subdivision dated 1987. Water lines, gas lines, sewer access, easements. Every inch of underground utility placement carefully marked in red and blue ink. I rolled the map across the attic floor and froze. Because running directly beneath the strip of land Ethan had stolen was the city's primary sewer access line. Not near it, not adjacent to it, directly under it. My heart started pounding so hard I could actually hear it. See, most people don't know what an easement is, but cities take them incredibly seriously. That land technically still belongs to the homeowner, but utility crews must have unrestricted access to it at all times, which means you cannot build permanent structures over it. No foundations, no concrete slabs, no luxury patios with built-in fireplaces and wine coolers. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked together in my head at once. Ethan's fancy revised survey probably fooled the county clerk because property disputes happen all the time, but whoever approved his plans either never checked the easement records or assumed nobody else would. I sat there in that dusty attic staring at the map for a long time, and I'm going to be honest with you, for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge exactly, but because I finally realized something important. Ethan thought this fight was about money. He assumed if he hired expensive enough people and acted confident enough, regular folks would eventually back down. And maybe most of the time they did. But he made one massive mistake. He underestimated how much history an old house can hold. The next morning, I went into full detective mode. I dug up the original steel survey pin near the back corner of my property, measured every inch from the old marker to Ethan's new patio framing, and photographed everything from 6 different angles. Then I scanned Walter's easement maps into my computer, highlighted the utility corridor, and printed copies for every department I could think of. City utilities, zoning enforcement, public works, even the emergency sewer maintenance office. By Friday afternoon, I'd left so many voicemails I probably sounded insane. Ethan, meanwhile, was hosting a cocktail party beside the half-finished patio like none of this mattered. I watched people laugh around portable heaters while servers carried trays of shrimp and champagne through my stolen yard. At one point, Ethan raised a glass toward me from across the fence with this smug little grin that practically said, "You lost." What he didn't know was that Monday morning at exactly 8:13 a.m., 3 White County trucks pulled into our cul-de-sac, and everything changed. I was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee when the first truck rolled up, and I gotta tell you, I have never seen a man's confidence evaporate faster than Ethan Callaway's did that morning. At first, he walked outside smiling like he thought the city had come to admire his backyard renovation. Then a second truck pulled in behind the first. Then a third. One said public utilities. Another said zoning enforcement. The last one had County Infrastructure Services printed across the side in giant blue letters. By the time 2 inspectors started unloading tripods and measuring equipment, Ethan's smile was completely gone. I stepped out onto my porch just as one of the inspectors introduced himself and asked Ethan a very simple question. "Sir, did you receive authorization to build over a protected municipal easement?" Ethan blinked a couple times like his brain needed to reboot. What? The inspector opened a folder, pulled out one of the maps I'd submitted, and pointed directly at the patio foundation. This entire section sits over an active sewer access corridor. Ethan immediately launched into corporate lawyer mode. There must be some misunderstanding. My survey team cleared this. The inspector didn't even react. Your survey team does not supersede city infrastructure maps. Oof. Even from 30 feet away, that one hurt. Over the next hour, the inspectors crawled all over Ethan's property, measuring distances, checking permits, marking sections of concrete with fluorescent paint. And the deeper they looked, the worse it got. Turns out the patio wasn't the only problem. Part of the new pool deck crossed into the easement too. So did the gas line feeding his outdoor kitchen. One inspector actually shook his head and muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath while reviewing the plans. At around 10:30, they officially posted a bright red stop work order on Ethan's back door. Construction halted immediately. The music shut off. Contractors started packing equipment into trucks without even making eye contact. And Ethan completely lost it. He cornered one of the inspectors near the driveway and started demanding names, threatening lawsuits, insisting somebody was making a mistake. I'll never forget the moment the inspector finally cut him off and said, "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation. If there's an emergency sewer failure under this structure, the city has legal authority to tear through your patio without compensation." Silence. Total silence. Even the contractors stopped moving for a second. Ethan looked like somebody had punched him in the chest. Over the next few weeks, things spiraled fast. The city ordered immediate demolition of the entire patio structure along with major sections of the pool surround and outdoor kitchen. Because utilities needed unrestricted access, everything built over the easement had to go. And since Ethan had already poured custom foundations and installed high-end stonework, demolition alone cost an absolute fortune. Rumor around the neighborhood was somewhere close to $400,000 by the time engineers, contractors, and legal fees piled up. Then the HOA jumped in. Apparently, Ethan never got final approval for several modifications because he assumed nobody in the neighborhood would challenge him. Big mistake. They started fining him weekly. Suddenly, the same neighbors he'd spent a year ignoring were attending HOA meetings just to watch him argue with the board. Diane actually leaned over to me during one meeting and whispered, "This is better than Netflix." And honestly, she wasn't wrong. But somewhere in the middle of all this, something unexpected happened. One evening, Ethan knocked on my front door. No sunglasses, no designer jacket, no smug grin, just exhaustion. He looked older somehow, like stress had physically aged him in a month. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I almost said no. Part of me wanted him to sit in the mess he created. But another part of me remembered what my wife used to say about anger. That if you hold on to it too long, eventually it starts eating you too. So I invited him in. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd spent nights digging through paperwork, and for the first time since he moved in, Ethan actually sounded human. He admitted the truth almost immediately. The revised survey wasn't technically fake, but he'd hired a consultant known for aggressive interpretations of property boundaries. He figured if construction moved quickly enough, nobody would challenge it before the project was finished. And honestly, he expected me to roll over because I was just some older guy living alone. Hearing him say that stung more than I expected. Not because it was insulting, but because he genuinely didn't realize how awful it sounded until the words were already out there. After a long silence, he finally looked at me and said, I really did think money could smooth this over. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, Ethan. People who've always had money start believing consequences are optional. He didn't argue with me after that. A couple months later, the house went up for sale. Ethan ended up taking a massive loss just to get out from under the repairs and fines. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona for some new tech startup deal. The developer who bought the property ripped out half the backyard and rebuilt everything legally. As for my side yard, the city eventually installed permanent steel boundary markers after re-verifying the original survey lines. My hydrangeas are growing back now. Not all of them made it, but enough did. Sometimes I sit out there in the evenings with a beer and think about how strange the whole thing was. Because in the end, this story was never really about land. It was about respect, about the kind of people who think ownership means power, and the kind of people who understand ownership also means responsibility. And I'll be honest, part of me still wonders what would have happened if I never found those old maps in the attic. Would Ethan have gotten away with it? Would the city have ignored me long enough for the damage to become permanent? I don't know. But I do know this. Some people mistake kindness for weakness right up until the moment reality introduces itself. So now I want to hear from you. If your neighbor stole part of your property and acted like money made him untouchable, would you have fought back the same way I did, or would you have handled it differently? And be honest, because after everything that happened, I still can't decide whether what I did was justice or revenge. They cut down my trees for a better view, so I shut down the only road that led to their front doors. That is the short version, the kind you tell at a bar when someone says, "No way you actually did that." The long version starts on a Tuesday that felt so normal, it almost hurts to remember. I was halfway through a turkey sandwich at my desk when my sister, Marla, called me. Marla does not call during work hours unless something is bleeding, on fire, or legally complicated. I answered with my mouth still full and said, "Hey, what's up?" And all I heard was wind and her breathing like she had been running. "You need to come home. Right now." There is a tone people use when they are trying not to panic. That was her voice. Tight. Controlled. Failing. What happened? "Just come home, Eli." I did not even shut my computer down properly. I grabbed my keys, mumbled something to my manager about a family emergency, and drove faster than I should have on a 2-lane county road that already makes me nervous in the rain. It was clear that day. Blue sky. Bright. Birds probably chirping somewhere. Meanwhile, my stomach was folding in on itself like bad origami. When I turned onto Pine Hollow Road, I knew before I saw it. There is a way a landscape feels wrong when something old has been removed. Like when someone takes a picture off the wall and you can still see the cleaner paint underneath. The 6 sycamores along the eastern edge of my property were gone. Not trimmed, not damaged by a storm. Gone. 40-year-old trees. Tall, thick, the kind that lean just slightly toward the sun like they have been listening their whole lives. My dad planted 3 of them when I was a kid. The other 3 came later, but they grew into a single wall of green that framed my house and blocked the ridge above me from staring straight down into my backyard. Now there were 6 clean stumps in a row. Flat cuts. Professional. Efficient. The branches had already been hauled off. Even the sawdust had been mostly cleared, like someone wanted to erase the evidence, but ran out of time. Marla was standing near the fence line with her arms crossed, jaw tight. She did not say, "I'm sorry," or "This is awful." She just shook her head and said, "I tried to stop them." "What do you mean you tried to stop them?" She told me 2 trucks pulled up late morning. Company logo on the side. Guys in hard hats and orange shirts. She walked over and asked what they were doing. One of them said, "Just following the work order, ma'am." She said, "Whose work order?" They said, "Cedar Ridge Estates HOA." I blinked at her. "That is the gated community up on the ridge, 5 years old, stone entrance sign. Little fountain that runs even during drought restrictions. Big houses. Bigger opinions." "We are not in Cedar Ridge," I said. "Exactly," she said. There was a business card tucked under my windshield wiper. Summit Tree and Land Management. I called the number with hands that were steadier than I felt. A guy answered on the second ring, voice cheerful like he was booking a haircut. "Summit Tree, this is Brad." "Brad, why did your crew cut down 6 sycamores on my property this morning?" There was a pause, papers shuffling. "We had a work order from Cedar Ridge Estates HOA for lot boundary clearing along the south overlook. That is not their land. That is mine." Another pause, longer this time. "Sir, the HOA president signed off on it." They indicated the trees were encroaching on common property and obstructing the community view corridor. View corridor. I almost laughed. Like my trees were a bureaucratic inconvenience. "Well, Brad, I am not part of Cedar Ridge, and those trees were planted decades before that community even existed." Silence. "Then, you're not part of Cedar Ridge?" "No." "Okay, let me make some calls, and I will get back to you." I hung up and stood there staring at the ridge. You could see the rooftops from my yard if you craned your neck. Big windows facing west. I had always figured the folks up there liked their sunsets uninterrupted. Apparently they liked them a little too much. About 2 hours later my phone rang again. Different number. "This is Daniel Whitmore, president of Cedar Ridge Estates HOA." "Of course it is," I thought. "Mr. Whitmore," I said. He sounded smooth. Confident. The kind of guy who wears loafers without socks and thinks it is a personality trait. "It has come to my attention there was some confusion regarding the tree removal this morning," he said. "We believe those trees were situated on community land." "They were not." "Yes. Well, we are reviewing the survey now. If a mistake was made, the association is prepared to reimburse you for the removal costs." I let that sit there for a second. "You mean the cost of cutting down 40-year-old trees?" He cleared his throat. "We can discuss reasonable compensation." Reasonable. I looked at the stumps again. My dad's hands covered in dirt, telling me to hold the sapling straight. My mom bringing lemonade out to the yard. Summer evenings when the leaves would rattle like soft applause. Reasonable. "Mr. Whitmore," I said slowly, "there is something else you should know. But I think I need to confirm a few details first." Of course. I did not tell him that the only road leading into Cedar Ridge cuts across the southern corner of my property. I did not tell him that when the developer built that road 20 years ago, he shook hands with the previous owner, a retired mechanic named Walter Jennings, and agreed on a verbal easement that was never recorded. Walter passed away 3 years before I bought the land from his estate. And verbal agreements, as it turns out, do not survive probate unless someone puts them in writing. Instead, I just said, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitmore," and hung up. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of closing documents and an old survey map, tracing property lines with my finger while Marla watched me like I was about to do something either brilliant or deeply stupid. "Maybe both," she said. I smiled a little. By morning, I had a surveyor scheduled. And by Tuesday afternoon, I knew exactly where my land ended and where their convenience began. The surveyor showed up Thursday morning in a dusty white truck with a tripod, a GPS unit, and the quiet energy of a man who has seen neighbors turn into enemies over 3 inches of dirt. His name was Carl. Late 50s, sunburned neck, permanent squint. He walked the property with me in slow, deliberate steps, checking old markers, tapping metal stakes into the ground, spray painting bright orange lines that felt strangely satisfying to watch. You thinking about building something? He asked. Something like that, I said. By noon, there it was in fluorescent certainty. The southern corner of my property extended 15 feet past the edge of the asphalt road that led up to Cedar Ridge Estates. Not just a sliver either. A real, measurable chunk. Enough to matter. Carl pulled off his gloves and looked at me. You know they've been using this for a while, right? 5 years. You planning on changing that? I stared up at the ridge again. Sunlight glinting off oversized windows. A landscaper trimming hedges with military precision. Yeah, I said. I think I am. He shrugged like a man who bills by the hour and does not judge. That afternoon I made 3 calls. One to a fencing company, one to a local attorney, and one to the county records office. The attorney, a woman named Denise Carter, did not laugh when I explained the situation. That alone made me trust her. So let me get this straight, she said. They removed mature trees from your property without verified boundary confirmation, based on an unrecorded assumption, and now they want to reimburse you for the cutting fee. That's about the size of it. And you believe there is no recorded easement granting them access across your southern boundary. I know there isn't. I checked the deed. Twice. She was quiet for a moment. Technically speaking, if there is no recorded easement and no prescriptive easement established through a longer statutory period, you have the right to restrict access to your land. What is the statutory period? In this state, 20 years of continuous, adverse use. They've had 5. Then they do not yet have a legal claim. But Eli, she added carefully, blocking access to an entire residential community will escalate this quickly. I looked at the 6 stumps lined up like headstones. Good, I said. The fencing company worked fast. Maybe too fast. Word travels in small counties, especially when money is involved. By Monday morning, steel posts were sunk deep into the ground, chain links stretched tight, and a heavy-duty gate installed squarely across the asphalt where it crossed onto my property. It was not subtle. 8 feet tall. Industrial. The kind of fence you see around construction sites and impound lots. I stood there as they bolted the lock into place. The metallic click echoed more than I expected. You sure about this? The crew lead asked. Not even a little, I said. But do it anyway. They left around 3 in the afternoon. For about an hour, nothing happened. Then, right around 4:30, the first SUV rolled down the hill. A silver Range Rover with tinted windows. It slowed, stopped in front of the fence, then idled. I could see the driver's silhouette, phone already pressed to his ear. 5 minutes later, another car pulled up behind him. Then another. Within 20 minutes, there was a line of luxury vehicles backed up along the Ridge Road like a high-end parking lot with nowhere to go. My phone started vibrating in my pocket before the sun dipped behind the trees that were no longer there. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. What the hell do you think you're doing? Daniel Whitmore did not sound smooth anymore. Standing on my property, I said. You cannot block the only access road to Cedar Ridge. Actually, I can. There is no recorded easement. This is outrageous. People are trying to get home. I glanced at the small convoy of frustration beyond the fence. That must be inconvenient. You're being petty. I felt something shift in my chest at that word. Petty would have been a complaint letter, Daniel. This is called property rights. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. We are prepared to compensate you fairly for the misunderstanding regarding the trees. You mean the trees you cut down without verifying ownership? It was an honest mistake. 6 40-year-old trees is not a typo. Silence again. He recalibrated. If you do not remove that fence immediately, we will pursue legal action. I already spoke to my attorney. I suggest you do the same. He hung up. That night, social media did what social media does. Someone in Cedar Ridge posted a photo of the fence in the neighborhood group. By dinner time, it had spilled into the county community page. Half the comments called me a hero. The other half called me unstable. Marla scrolled through them while sitting at my kitchen counter eating takeout Chinese. You're trending, she said. Fantastic. Maybe I'll start a podcast. Underneath the sarcasm, though, I felt something else creeping in. Not guilt. Not exactly. But awareness. There were families up there. Kids. People who had nothing to do with the decision to cut my trees. They were collateral damage in a fight they did not start. But neither did I. Tuesday morning, I woke up to 3 voicemails. One from Daniel. One from a woman who introduced herself as vice president of the HOA. and one from someone who did not leave a name but suggested I was endangering emergency services access. That one made me pause. I called Denise. Can they argue public safety? They can try, she said. But unless there is a recorded easement or an emergency order from a judge, you are within your rights. That said, if this drags out, a court could impose a temporary access arrangement. So I have leverage, but it's on a clock. Exactly. By Wednesday afternoon, the tone changed. Daniel called again. Slower this time. Measured. Eli, we've consulted counsel. And it appears there is no recorded easement on file. I waited. However, he continued, the association maintains that the prior owner granted verbal permission for access. Walter Jennings died 3 years before I bought the property. Verbal agreements don't transfer with ghosts. That line hit harder than I intended. He did not respond right away. What would it take to resolve this? He finally asked. There it was. Not a threat. A question. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the empty stretch where my trees used to sway. First, you replace all 6 sycamores. Mature. Professionally planted. Guaranteed to survive. That's significant. So were they. He exhaled slowly. All right. What else? A formal written apology from the HOA acknowledging the error and the property violation. We can draft something. And, I said, if you want continued access across my land, we do it properly. Recorded easement. Market rate compensation. What are you suggesting? $2,000 a month. He actually laughed at that. That's absurd. Is it? You've been using that land for free for 5 years. Consider it retroactive gratitude. We are not paying you $24,000 a year to use a strip of asphalt. Then you can build a new road. There it was. The silence that stretches long enough for someone to picture the cost of earth-moving equipment. Engineering. Permits. Environmental review. Probably 6 figures. Easy. We need to take this to the board, he said finally. Of course you do. By Friday evening, the line of cars had thinned. Some residents had started parking near the fence and walking the remaining stretch to their homes. A few tried to argue with me in person. One man in golf attire accused me of holding the neighborhood hostage. I told him hostage situations usually involve weapons. I was using a padlock. Late that night, Daniel called again. The board has agreed to your terms in principle, he said. Tree replacement, written apology, and a recorded easement with a monthly access fee. In principle, we would like to negotiate the amount. I smiled, even though he could not see it. Then we are making progress. And that is where things got complicated in a way I did not expect. When Daniel said complicated, I figured he meant numbers. I was wrong. The following Monday, I got a knock on my door around 7 in the evening, right when the sky turns that deep orange that makes you forget you're mad at the world for a minute. I opened it expecting another angry homeowner. Instead, it was a woman in her early 40s, hair pulled back, eyes tired in a way that had nothing to do with traffic. Hi, she said softly. My name's Rachel Kim. I live in Cedar Ridge, on Aldercrest Lane. I nodded, but didn't invite her in. Not yet. I'm not here to yell at you, she added quickly. I wanted to talk. We stood on my porch with the sound of crickets filling the space where my trees used to rustle. She glanced at the stumps, then back at me. My son has asthma, she said. Last week an ambulance had trouble getting through because of the traffic backup. He's okay, but it scared me. There it was. The human cost. I had tried not to stare at too long. I didn't cut those trees, she continued. Most of us didn't even know it was happening. The board makes decisions and sends emails after the fact. They've been obsessed with preserving the Valley View since the first house sold. It's like the view is part of their identity. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I'm not trying to hurt your kid, I said. I'm trying to make sure people don't treat my land like it's community property. I know. And honestly, what they did was wrong. But this whole thing is turning neighbors into enemies. People are fighting in the streets over something they didn't vote on. She looked up toward the ridge, where porch lights were flickering on one by one. Maybe there's a way to fix it without burning everything down. After she left, I sat on the porch a long time, watching headlights approach the fence, pause, reverse, listening to the quiet where leaves used to whisper. I had leverage, yes. I had legal ground. But what did I actually want? Justice? Money? Respect? Probably all 3. The next morning Daniel called again. His voice had lost its edge. It sounded tired. The board met last night, he said. There's division. Some residents are furious with us. Others are threatening to sue the HOA for mismanagement. That's not my problem, I said, but without heat. No, it isn't. But it could become yours if this spirals. I thought about Rachel. About the ambulance. Here's what I want, I said slowly. Full replacement of the 6 sycamores. Not saplings. Mature trees, at least 15 feet tall. Professionally planted with a 3-year survival guarantee. Agreed. A recorded easement drafted by my attorney, not yours. Access limited strictly to the existing roadway footprint. No expansion without my written consent. He hesitated, then said, all right. $2,000 a month in access fees. Adjusted for inflation every 5 years. There was a long pause. The board countered with $1,200. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. Daniel, building a new road would cost you at least $200,000, probably more once environmental impact studies kick in. I'm asking $24,000 a year. That's not greed. That's math. You're enjoying this, aren't you? No, I said honestly. I'm not. I'm just done being overlooked. Silence again. Then a quiet exhale. $1,800 a month. Final offer. I let the quiet stretch. I could hear papers shifting on his end. Someone whispering in the background. $1,800. Trees replaced. Written apology delivered to every homeowner. And the HOA covers all legal and recording fees. Done, he said, almost before I finished. We drafted the agreement over the next 2 weeks. Denise was meticulous. Every clause was clear. Every boundary precise. The easement was recorded with the county. Official. Binding. The day they planted the new trees, I stood off to the side with my arms crossed while a landscaping crew maneuvered massive root balls into freshly dug holes. The trunks were thick, leaves full and green. Not 40 years old, but not babies either. Rachel walked down the hill and stood beside me. They're beautiful, she said. They are, I agreed. Daniel showed up too. No loafers this time. Work boots. He handed me a folder. The apology letter. Signed by the full board. I opened it. It was direct. No corporate fluff. They acknowledged the mistake, the unauthorized removal, the failure to verify property lines. It wasn't perfect, but it was real enough. He cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Eli, we should have handled this differently from the start. Yeah, I said. You should have. He nodded once. No argument. When they finally cut the lock off the temporary gate and removed the fence panel blocking the road, cars rolled through slowly, almost cautiously, like they were passing through a checkpoint between 2 countries that had just signed a treaty. That first month, a check for $1,800 arrived right on time. And every month after that, people ask me sometimes if I feel bad, if I went too far, if shutting down an entire neighborhood over 6 trees was excessive. Maybe it was. But here's the thing about living downhill from wealth and influence. You get used to being invisible. Decisions get made above you, literally and figuratively. Trees get labeled view obstructions. Land gets treated like a suggestion instead of a boundary. I didn't block that road because I hate my neighbors. I blocked it because respect should not be optional. The new sycamores are growing in well. When the wind moves through them, it doesn't sound exactly like it used to. Different rhythm. Younger leaves. But it's something. Sometimes I catch myself looking up at the ridge, wondering if they resent me every time they write that monthly check. Or if, maybe, they learn something too. Rachel and I talk now and then. Her son is doing fine. She told me the HOA elections are coming up, and a few board members might not survive the vote. As for Daniel, he waves when he drives by. It's a small thing, but it's something. So here's my question for you. If someone cut down something that mattered to you, not just financially, but personally, how far would you go to make it right? Would you settle quietly? Or would you lock the gate and make them notice? I'm curious where you land on this. Was I protecting my property, or just feeding my pride? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than I probably should. And if you like stories about boundaries, power, and the messy line between justice and revenge, hit subscribe and stick around. Because sometimes the view from the bottom of the hill is clearer than the one at the top.